Thank you for coming, everyone. Good morning. I'm just going to do a bit of introduction and opening for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Mick. I know who you're here to see. So I just want to start, I guess, by giving you a bit of an update. This is a showcase presentation, but we're not going to be a big sales pitch. It's really about showing you a really good example of what good athlete data management is all about. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background to this and also where we're going with it. We've had a really good run with Smartabase, and it's continuing to explode. It's like sitting on a bucking bronco. One of the key turning points for us was being selected by the AIS a year and a half ago, and we now have a great relationship with them. And they're rolling out a fantastically successful athlete management system. They call it the AMS. And that's really been a great success and starting to actually pave the way to really get something back out of athlete data management, which is a real challenge. So it's given us some really good resources. It's also just given us a tremendous amount of experience. You know, we've implemented this thing with over 100 organisations now, and we always learn a lot of different things along the way. And I'll share a few of those with you, a few things that are the sort of, you know, what are the next steps, and then I'll be handing over to Mick. What have we learned? Too much to tell you in a day or a week, but I guess some of the key points I'll get across, some words of wisdom, I suppose, and you can always come and talk to me later. Athlete data management is a really dynamic, moving target. There's all these new data sources coming up all the time. I mean, I think back to when we started Fusion, there wasn't commercial GPS. There weren't smartphones. There weren't any of those things. Accelerometers were used by NASA. Gyroscopes were fictitious. So you've got to keep moving, and you've got to be able to keep moving. And that's why I think why we're doing well with our product is that it can be customised really quickly and easily. And it can be customised, most importantly, by our people, and that's the greatest asset of one of these projects. Your people and our people. It's more about them than it is about the technology, to be honest with you. Technology is just part of it. It's how you use it that really determines the value you get out of it. And I think that's something that we've learned a tremendous amount about and continuing to learn about. Communication is vital. You know, Nick Poulos talked this morning about their systems and his team and the support team, and that really is critical. You know, you have to have all stakeholders involved in this kind of project, right through to the athlete. Don't just build something and tell the athletes to use it. They need to be on board as well. Everybody needs to be on board. The different departments, if you're in a football team, everyone needs to be involved in this thing, and that's really critical. And you've got to have those champions. You know, this is a significant project. It's going to take some time. What are we focusing on? A couple of things we've found is that mobile apps are obviously, this may be obvious, but mobile apps are critical, especially for the athlete-facing parts of these systems. Having really good success with that. And again, it's about getting the athletes to engage, and you have to make it really, really easy. And the way to do that is, you know, thankfully we've got apps now and we can do that sort of thing. And integration is really critical. You know, we're really pushing now vendors, and we've already had a couple like Visual Coaching Pro who've integrated in, and we can exchange data and give people one port of call. That's our goal, is to really plug all this together, not so much to try and rule the world or anything like that. And we're continuing to really do that aggressively. So where to now? We've got some customers who are 3-4 years down the road with this, and they've got some really fantastic, well-structured data, which in itself is a great achievement. So everyone's talking about big data, analytics, you know, Moneyball, and we've all heard a lot about this. So what I want to do is just lead into, and Mick's going to start to show you some of the work that these guys are doing in this area. I just want to start with, I guess, a bit of a 101 for those people who've heard all these terms but want to sort of have our take on what this is all about. So what is analytics? A lot of you are already doing it, and you probably just don't call it analytics. But you've got all of this data. There's so much of it, and it often can be overwhelming. What analytics is about the first step is just finding the things that you already know you're looking for. So being able to extract what you need and have that presented to you in those single views. And Nick talked about that this morning as well, about having those one pages with colour codes, bang, where are we, what's happening. But it's also then the next step is finding things that you might not have known were there. So being able to, use these technologies, these analytics platforms to actually go through this data and start to flag things that you might be interested in looking at. They're not going to tell you the meaning of life by pressing a button. They require training, they require work, and they require testing. But it's an amazing tool if used properly. And again, it's not about the technology, it's about how you use it that counts. It doesn't have to be super complicated. So what is analytics? I think this is a good way to put it. It starts down here, operational reporting, and this is we see a lot of people who said, okay, and we talk to a lot of clients and they say, right, yeah, we're ready, we're going to get into predictive analytics. We're going to go, straight to level 4. There's a lot of things that need to be done first, and there's a lot of things that can be done first before you even get to that stage. I mean, this takes a lot of data. It takes you've got to have some great statisticians on board. It's a journey, but there's a lot that you can do in between to still use this information really well. A lot of people are here. Operational reporting, reactive data, isolated data, fragmented. It's all in different Excel files. It's on bits of paper. It's in different repositories. Each sort of department has their own database or Excel files, and they're able to make judgments about their area, but there's very limited multidisciplinary sort of data sharing and looking at the whole picture. So step one is to start getting that. Step one is to start getting your sort of advanced reporting. So having those multi-dimensional views, having them all sort of coming in one source and automating that, making it easy, setting benchmarks, setting those levels, those colour coding systems, traffic light systems, objective decision making. So giving people clear indications about things. And doing that in real time. There's no point knowing, 3 hours later that a guy woke up with a sore hamstring. It needs to all happen really, really quickly. And I guess that's been our sort of focus, is getting people here. And now it's time to start getting into this. So step 3 is, okay, now we've got some data. You've got to have this well-structured data first. And while you're collecting that, you don't have to just sort of, and we just really discourage people from going, oh, well, let's just collect data for a few years and have this monstrous database and then start doing analytics. Use it along the way, because that'll get people complying, gets people on board, and then you can have your cake and eat it. And you'll see some good examples of that today again. But then you can get to here, statistical analysis, starting to develop these models, starting to work out what is related to injuries, what is related to performance, and obviously they're the key questions. Everybody wants to know, how do we stop injuries and how do we get the best out of our athletes? And again, starting to give people these actionable indicators, and indicators is the key word here. And I know I had a good talk to Stu Cormack, and he's very passionate about this. Nothing's ever going to spit out one number. That's not going to happen. It's about giving people really good indicators, and at the end of the day, we talk about coaching instinct, we talk about people who make good decisions and things like that. They're running analytics. The human brain is an incredible analytical machine, but again, it needs to be given good information. So again, good indicators, and the coaches, the art will never disappear. It's about getting better information. But then level 4 is certainly something that can be done. You start to develop these predictive models and actually start to get these amazing programs, be able to start to tell people what the risk is, give you risk analysis, and be able to model different things. So what's going to happen if we do drop high intensity running meters this week or this month? What's going to happen if we do change this? Where will that move? But that again, it takes testing, it takes time. It needs to be tested and trained. So in terms of some of the, in terms of even just, giving, it's about using visualization as much as possible, showing people histories, showing people, again, traffic light systems, ranking things up, drawing people's attention to things that require their attention is what's really important. And we often, talk to our customers at this and really try and pull our customers down this road of saying, don't just collect all of this stuff. Make use of it, really get into it. I met with, caught up with Scott Barker a few weeks ago. He's now at the Broncos, was with the Knights and with the Kangaroos, and he said it really well. What's the point of tracking something if you can't alter it with prescription? And I was like, yeah, that's a really good way to put it. What's the point of tracking 700 things when you only program 20? So that's something to think about. It's about using the data well rather than just collecting data for data's sake. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Key metrics in different areas, giving people the ability to drill down. And one thing we've worked on a lot is our integration with Excel, being able to let people still build their own things. Being able to let people still do what they're doing, but replacing Excel as the database, and that's what we're all about. Then comes the next level, and this is something which the AIS have brought to the table and got us to now integrate with an analytics platform. So we can start to get people doing these things, and again, Mick will show you some of this today. Step one is, again, just an extra level of visualization. It's about just being able to explore and look at these indicators. It's not going to tell you the magic answer straight away. That's going to take time. But you can get into that later on. So this is where you then get into building models. So choosing statistical methods, loading up variables that you might be interested in. And these things will start to come back and tell you, how strong are your models and what are the things that are important up here. And the idea is you collect more, you analyse it, and then you collect less. So over time, if it's not important, stop measuring it. Again, cut to the chase, basically, is what this is all about. So I'm going to head over to Mick now. Thank him very much for coming today. He's a very busy man. He's been travelling all over the place. So Mick Drew is a physiotherapist and an epidemiologist. He was at the Newcastle Knights for 4 or 5 years, and then moved to the AIS a few years ago. He did a few years servicing the rowing program there, but he's now one of the main drivers of their AMS project and also their new analytics project, and he's got some amazing things going on in that space, and they will be doing some incredible things in the next 12 to 18 months in this space. And the great thing is that they have a very open attitude to sharing it, as you'll see now. So thanks, Mick. Over to you.
I like to walk around a bit, so if it gets a bit distracting, just tell me to stand back up there. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming to this session. As Marcus has indicated, we're quite open about sharing. And that comes from basically, we've got 25 sports, 3,800 athletes using our system now. And so to get across that amount of servicing, we have to be open, we have to be freely available to talk and share ideas. And truly that's where we've seen a lot of our developments come from. So I've labelled today's talk in pursuit of the Holy Grail. I don't have the Holy Grail, I don't think we'll ever get there. But I'm going to show you through the steps that we're taking to sort of hopefully answer some of those big questions that we've got. To start with, I don't work for Fusion Sport. They're our vendor. We have a great relationship with them, but I have no conflicts of interest to declare. So early detection, early response. Really, this is at the core of why we collect data. We want to pull in all these data streams, put it in the context of the athlete, the team, the phase, and then go from there to make a response. Whether we do something or nothing, at least we have the data to back up our decision. So why? I'm not going to get into this too much, but great paper by the football researchers over in Sweden. Basically, the lower the injury burden, the better you finish in the table. The better the player availability rates. So by this, if you've got 20 players and 15 of them available, well, you're going to be better off than someone that only has half their available list there. And in fact, they score more points per game. Internal data by Ben Raysmith has shown that the percentage of missed training days before your key event in track and field predicts your chances of success. I'm not going to get into that data, but watch this space. So to tell you guys what you already know, training loads are linked to performance and they're linked to injury. I'm not going to go into too much of this today. It's beyond the scope of this talk. At the end, I'm more than happy to chat. So if we get into how to prevent injuries, there's two main models. So Caroline Finch back in 2006 introduced the TRIP method. It's basically an expansion of the Van Michelson model, which was back in 92, I believe, and she added a few extra steps. But when we look at it, both of them have developed or introduced preventative measures. Now this is from a research intervention approach. It doesn't always hold up in the elite sports arena. So today what I'm going to do is hopefully walk you through how we think about preventing injuries from an elite sport point of view, particularly now that we have data streams coming at us. So if you look up the textbooks, I'll give you a little picture like this. And in fact, I'm going to rejig this graph today in the context of an elite sport arena. I'm going to use some data that we've pulled out of the AMS and just also some dummy data to illustrate my point. And so let's re-look at this. So you've got primary prevention, secondary and tertiary. This is probably the biggest point that when I'm talking to people who are now developing their own forms in the AMS that they don't understand well. There are different prevention strategies for different areas. And so if we summarise this, primary is really, let's remove the risk factors that we know of. Secondary is getting into that early detection, early response, or early treatment. And the third is to remove the complications. Now, I'll show you an example in a sec about how the World Health Organization went to cure smallpox. But it also pays to think about this in the Ebola crisis at the moment. A lot of these processes are created by epidemiologists looking at communicable diseases. So in the context of Ebola, primary prevention would be hygiene and making sure that everything's healthy in whatever, your environment. Early detection, early response. And this is where they're at now. If you've got, recently I just flew back from Doha and they said on the plane, if you have a fever, if you're coughing, if you're sneezing, report immediately to the quarantine people at the airport, or if you develop them 1 or 2 days later, go straight to the hospital and say you've been overseas. So what they're doing there is they're creating an early detection and therefore give you early treatment so you're more likely to survive. The removing complications is once you've got Ebola, you obviously don't want to die, so that has some more serious consequences there. For us, it might be a retirement due to injury, season-ending injury or something like that, or just more injuries. So let's look at what are the primary ones. Well, strength, range of motion, all those pre-season screening tools. From my point of view, looking at all the data, I find these are probably interesting, but probably not great in the elite sports context, because I've yet to have anyone convince me how a pre-season strength test can predict injuries 9 months later. I think there's too much time difference between when you collect the data to when you make a decision. And so it's rife with confirmation bias. It's like, oh yeah, that fits. I'm happy with that, job done. So we're moving away from this. I'm not trying to undersell these by any means. I think they're important and I'll show you why in a sec. But we also know previous injury and age. They are the common variables that come out. Now we usually talk about these as modifiable and non-modifiable. Today I'm going to refer to them as baseline risk and a risk modifier. So the baseline risk is the baggage you're carrying around. You're 28 years old, you can't change that. You can only get worse. You can only get older. So we need to acknowledge how their baseline risk is affected by daily data. So namely the loads that you place on them. Because you can carry these risks, and I can tell you I've got all the risks here, but I'm not an elite athlete, so I'm probably not going to sustain the injury. So the secondary prevention programs is really where I'm going to focus later on. But we need to once again put this into context of what is the bigger evidence out there. And so we have biological onset. Using Ebola, you come in contact and you get the bugs on you now. It then becomes detectable. And then you become symptomatic. Now in sport, the point it becomes detectable may be the point it becomes symptomatic. If there's a guy on the grassy knoll and they get the hemi, all right, probably you can't detect it before he feels it. But is there some sort of biological onset, namely fatigue or whatever else, damage to the muscle that comes on before they feel it? And that's sort of where we're heading. So in epidemiology speak, we call the time between the biological onset to when they feel the symptoms as the latent time, okay? And a subset of that is the lead time. And the lead time, the lead time is where we're playing with in this field. So what we're trying to do is bring the lead time forward So the lead time gives us a bigger window to act. If you have a very small lead time, data comes in or something happens and then they're symptomatic. We can't do anything. So what we're doing is really playing with lead time in elite sport. And so putting prevention in perspective, elite sport can be seen as, let's just say, on a World Health Organization, a smaller priority. So let's look at smallpox. And I really encourage everyone to watch this TED Talk. I watched this and this sort of changed how we go about it at the AIS in terms of prevention. And so I'm going to use the template that they used and try and backstep to how we're doing it. So number one was understand the disease. We do this all the time. Think about how many epidemiology papers are out there now. The epidemiology of hamstring injuries in AFL, the epidemiology of whatever in whatever. So I think we're at a point where we understand enough. I still believe there's scope for us to do more, but we've got good evidence there already. Develop an early warning system. So in the smallpox case, what they did was they filmed or they took pictures of kids and adults with smallpox at day 1 through to the last day. And once you do that enough, you see a pattern. You see that a kid with this body coverage, I'm not a smallpox expert, but this amount of coverage is day 1 and blah, 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 blah. And so from there, they were able to produce en masse educational tools. And so what they did here is I think it was something like 2 billion copies of this one pager, and they hand delivered it to India, which was the final frontier of smallpox. And so what it basically outlined is if your daughter, son, or your relative or friend, if they're an adult, looks like this, you need to let us know because we can help you. And so that was their early warning. That's like what we're doing with our loading data, with our screening data. Something is awry, let's do something about it. They created a method of alert. So, these could be really deep into India. I doubt they have internet where they were. This is back in the 80s as well. And so what they did was quite simple. Let's put a white flag on the front door. And this was quite a brilliant method because there would be a representative of the WHO on each region or whatever, and they'll go, white flag, I need to give someone a call. They'll helicopter in, give the vaccination, the child lives. Great message because then you get buy-in. And that's what we're trying to do with elite sport as well, is we're trying to get a few near misses. So we're trying to prevent a few cases and then you get buy-in, you get traction, the coach likes it, the athlete likes it, everyone's happy. The interesting thing about this case is that sometimes the parents, due to stigma or otherwise, they didn't really want to put out the flag. But then other relatives or other people in the town went and flagged that house for them because they knew the benefit that if that kid has it, my kid could have it next. So quite an interesting way. Create an action plan, as I've already outlined. When that white flag goes up, we get on the blower and we get a helicopter in and we save the kid. This is probably the number one area where I find these systems fall down. In fact, in a few sports, the staff stopped confirming the data. So in terms of injury and illness data, they'll stop ringing. And that's the fundamental flaw, I think, is to believe that the system is doing your job for you. It undisputably is not. It is making your job easier. It's not replacing you. And so what we're trying to do now is spend 90% of the time coming up with a plan because of the data, not 90% of the time collecting the data. And repeat till done. So I'm going to step you through these in how we've gone about it. So, as I said, there's a few studies out there. I could have gone on forever. But I think we've got enough baseline data to say we know what's wrong in certain sports. So this is a graph taken straight out of the AMS. I'm going to spend a bit of time orientating everyone to it. Now, apologies, I think the green is not really showing up. But in the top graph, what we've got is the acute and chronic training loads. The chronic training load is the blue one, which is easily seen. The green one, which is much harder to be seen, is sort of going above and below the chronic training load. So for those of you that aren't across what the chronic training load and the acute training load is, it's the 7-day average and the 28-day average. So the chronic is the longer average, the acute is the 7-day. It's commonly referred to as fitness and fatigue. Whether this is fitness or fatigue is debatable. We adopt those terms, and I think it fits quite nicely. Down the bottom, and at the top, this here is what we call the iceberg graph, which is basically the training stress balance with the area under the curve filled in. And the training stress balance, which is much easily seen here, same graph, same time scale, is basically the ratio of the short to long averages, so the 7 divided by the 28. So if your training stress balance is above 100%, you're doing more this week than you have on average in the last month. Vice versa, you're in taper if it's lower. If you had to reduce it down to a number of probably what is our biggest risk, I feel that this is where we're putting our money at the moment. And so, it's debatable once again, but if you have an altered strength ratio, quad to hemi ratio or whatever, great, all right, you're at a certain amount of risk. But if you do 5 times as much this week than you did last week, it's a no-brainer, it's the volume. And that's what we're commonly seeing across many sports, particularly in the camp-based arena, where you have athletes that may train at home with a different coach. Coach has got them full-time for a week or two, and they come in and they go nuts. I think this happens less in an elite sort of professional club, because you have them all the time. But in the national sporting organisation, it's not uncommon, and we call that the camp syndrome. And we also see there's a lag. So they come in, they do the week, but then they get sick or injured for a month afterwards. So that training stress balance is sort of our key indicator at the moment. Based off some studies, we've used 150 as a bit of a marker for the training stress balance. So 50% more this week than you have on average over the month. And it seems to be a common cut-off. So when we were designing this system, we sort of just had to take a stab at a number just because people were asking for a number. And so we chose 150 based off the cricket study, although 200 is really where it's at in their study. So we said, well, 150 is a minor onset of risk and 200 is a risk. And it's surprising how many sports have come back to us and gone, I think there's something in that. And so that's where we're currently doing a few projects. But it's not just the number. So if you look at the literature, they do a week-to-week calculation. So the training stress balance in the week prior to injury was 150 or 200 or whatever. That doesn't work for us. We look at this daily. So we don't know what the daily calculation of risk is. So we're starting to play around with, if we integrate the curve, we start to see the area under the curve as I suppose a calculation of how much hole that they're burying themselves in or how much taper they're doing. We're looking at the rate of change of the TSB, so the gradient, if you smooth the line out. So you can see there, that's a pretty steep gradient, there as well, there as well. And so I don't know if this person got injured or not, I didn't really check that, but they're the points that we start to look at is, oh, they've really ramped up here, and also, oh, they're quite high. So if you look at the area under the curve, you can be above 100% for a while, maybe 2 months, and that will give you a certain amount of work as the area under the curve, or you can get there really quickly and it'll give you the same amount. And we don't know if it's the area under the curve, how you get there or whatever, but it seems to be a bit of a trend. And to highlight, load monitoring is a secondary prevention program, not a primary one. And so we need to consider it differently to a strength ratio. They're not the same. They're different time points, they're different modalities. So wellness is quite an interesting one as well. Some people hang their hat on it. I personally sit on the opposite end where I think it's nice to know but probably less predictive. I think it's more of a consequence to the loads that we apply rather than telling us about the loads. And so this is out of an add-on product that we're using. So we use Smartabase to collect the data, but to get to that 3 and 4 on the data points, we're starting to use this and then integrating back in, so it's the one log on. But confirmation bias is really rife in wellness. That my 7 is different to your 7. When I was at the Knights, it's quite common that the coaches would go, oh, 7, nah, that wasn't a 7, you know. And we've all experienced this. And so what we're trying to do is normalise it back. And so you can see down the side, we've got the actual number that's there. So I think on average there are 6.5. The ghosted numbers are the normative ranges they're at, and above and beyond that is when it's flagged. I think, and you can see even within this, once you normalise it, it's quite variable in this person. And this is proper data as well. At the top, what we're trying to do is condense it down to a single view to speed it up. Now, I'm struggling to see that at the front, so I'm sure you guys have no chance. But here is an alert, so that's our alert. The actual coding behind it is a bit more complicated, and not perfect yet. We've got here their compliance. You know, we know that there's no point getting data if it's uncompliant, particularly around the loads. If you're doing relative loads and they miss a week, you're going to get an artifact in the data where you're thinking they're at high risk. It's really just the haven't put it in. Then across here is the individual wellness categories with what we call a spark line, just a trend line that you can see what's happening. But the dots are the key thing here. So you should be able to see the dots there. And the dot means that that's aberrant based off their historical data. And then the overall is the sum of this person needs to be looked at. The opposite happens, that this person is better than normal and probably needs to be looked at as well. Because we also want to know when people are good, not just bad. Down here, the body chart is, so this is what we call a shapefile. A shapefile is a way of representing data on a body chart. It's not flat data. You can click on this and you can put relationships behind it, and it's going to be a big thing. I mean, in fact, we've got a PhD student coming on soon to look at the relationship. So we can click on a body area and it might show you the dependent areas based off that. So then we can start to say if someone gets a hip injury, we know that they're going to get a knee injury, or basing off the data across big data sets as well. So then we can get into the tertiary prevention side that's saying, right, we'll treat your hip, but we need to be aware any knee pain or any further symptoms, we need to know that as well. A little bit deeper into the wellness, so this is energy here. And so we're just putting a 3-day average with these rather than a longer one. And so this one here is interesting, and these are the trends we're looking at. So obviously green's good, red's bad. The brownie green's somewhere in the middle. This person was good at the start. They went through, and then by the end, not so good. Then they stopped reporting. For a compliant person to stop reporting, that's a flag for us as well. So the absence of data is equally important to having data. So once we get into those principles, it's more of a big data area rather than a sports stats area. And so this person here would have to be checked because it's a big change for them. Equally, we don't know what happens here where they're non-compliant and then they start getting compliant. Probably a good sign. Or the coach is giving them a bit of a rev. When we start to look at that 28-day average, the chronic training load, I think it starts to show up some clear things. And I think this is where our money is going to be in the next couple of years. So the stars represent injuries, okay? The ghosted X's are daily loads based off that average. And so common sense would say when they get to 6,000 chronic training units that they break. So it happened once, then they broke. Happened again, then they broke. If we just did that, once again, that confirmation bias is going to be in there. So we compared that to the rest of the girls' data, and it seems that most, I think this is in water polo, most girls in this squad would break at 4,500 units. For those of you that have collected data, that's actually really high loads, like really high. In fact, some of the highest loads we collect. And so comparing this person to the team, I think, is important in this case. We can see that it doesn't account for 2 other injuries, though. That's the study we based it off. Maybe it was relative, not absolute load. So what did they do this week compared to the month? And when we add in the 150, just once again plucking it out of one research paper or to maybe 2, and we can see now the 2 X's or 2 stars are accounted for. It's in line with the cricket study, but it's not perfect, okay? And using that model, it's about 50% accurate. But what we're seeing, though, is that if it stays high, is probably more of an indicator of just going up and coming back down. Because we all use periodized models. So you have that intense week where it might be artificially high, or it might be off the light week where it's artificially high as well. And that's what the Rogalski study showed. The absolute was better than relative. And so getting back to those steps that the WHO took, so we can set up a performance alert, I think that's the name of them, in the system, and give you a flat report like an Excel chart here. You can set up for the contact details, so email and SMS to be sent to you by an email, and that's what the email looks like. So this person today was aberrant for some reason. It's not telling you why, it's just telling you that you should investigate it. So summing up, we've sort of gone through all these strategies, except for the tertiary one now. And so, as I said earlier, it's about reducing recurrences and reducing subsequent injuries and illnesses. We're finding that there's a significant link there as well. And so, if we look at the subsequent injuries here, so the red is the index injury, which is the first injury in the monitoring period. It becomes a bit more complicated now that we've got 2 to 3 years of data. But we've also got athlete-reported injuries, and they're equally important. That for me as a physio, I'm going, this person's eye got 4 injuries. The athlete's telling me they got like 10 to 12 injuries. Changes the pictures a little bit. And you can see the consequence. So down here, on the back of that, their chronic training load went down. They ramped back up, which that would represent quite a high TSB as well. Get injured again. And you can see the net effect across, 4 months, that their chronic training load is no better towards the end as it is at the start. But for this person, bringing in the last couple of things I said and this, that maybe for this individual athlete, their prescription is don't do more than 4,500 units and be aware when the TSB goes above 150. Now, I'm not saying that we should never do more than 4,500 units. Just at this time point, they seem maybe that it's at risk. So the idea is to push it up slowly, using a TSB to guide you there. Final summary. We know that injury-free, consistent training is beneficial. Didn't go over it, but we all know that. If someone trains well and doesn't get injured, they're going to go well, as long as they're talented enough. We now have the infrastructure and some emerging evidence for it to happen, whereas previously we had this dream of having this IT system and all that to do it, but I think we're sort of getting there. We must consider both absolute and relative workloads in the context of the athlete, the phase, the whole environment. Be aware what type of prevention program you're doing. The pre-season screening is not the be-all and end-all. I think the real money is using that to establish baseline risk and then looking at how that risk is modified throughout the season. And we do that daily, weekly, monthly, phasically. Avoid confirmation bias. It's rife. Thank you.